Today in this topic, we shall be discussing about the first line of defense, which includes physical, mechanical, and chemical defenses. Now, the various physical barriers and mechanical defenses that protect the human body against infection and diseases are of various different types. Also, we shall be learning about how enzymes in body fluids provide protection against infection or disease, and the role of microbiota as a first line defense against infection and diseases. First thing one should know here is the non-specific innate immunity can be characterized as a multifaceted system of defenses that targets invading pathogens in a very non-specific manner. And here we shall be learning about the numerous defenses that make up this system into three different categories. The first one is namely physical defenses. The second is chemical defenses, and the third one is cellular defenses. So, considering these three, another important thing to keep in mind is that these defenses do not function independently, which clearly mentions or states that these three different categories, that is, physical, chemical, and cellular defenses, they often overlap one over the other. Like when we talk about physical defenses, it involves physical barriers, mechanical defenses, and then the third, that is microbiome. Let me mention that here. So when it comes to physical defenses, it involves three, that is physical barriers, then the second one is mechanical defenses, and the third is microbiome. So this is a general categorization of physical defenses. First, physical barriers, second, mechanical defenses, and the third can be categorized as microbiome. Now, when we talk about physical barriers or physical defenses, it provides the body's most basic form of non-specific defense. And it includes physical barriers to microbes, starting from skin and mucous membranes, as well as mechanical defenses that can physically remove microbes and substances which are not required in the body, which can be called as even debris from areas of the body which actually can cause harm or infection. Apart from this, the microbiome, which is a third categorization of physical defenses, it provides a measure of physical protection against disease. As microbes of normal microbiota, they generally compete with pathogens for nutrients and cellular binding sites which are necessary to cause infection. Now, coming to the main category, that is physical barriers. So, what exactly is physical barrier? What is the role that it actually plays? So, physical barriers, it plays a very important role in preventing microbiomes or microbes from reaching the tissues which are vulnerable to infection or susceptible to infection. So, when we talk about this at a cellular level, the barriers here will consist of cells which are tightly joined to prevent invaders like the disease causing germs from crossing through to reach the deeper tissues. Like, for instances, if we look at this picture carefully, so the first picture indicates this tight junction. So, what exactly it actually means? So, here, so for example, if you take the endothelial cells, which is actually the lining of the blood vessels, they have very tight cell to cell junctions. So, this tight cell to cell junction network actually blocks microbes from gaining access to the stream of the blood, that is, gaining access to the bloodstream. So, here the cell junctions are generally composed of a membrane or the cell membrane proteins that may connect with the extracellular matrix or with complementary proteins from the neighboring cells. So, like this, tissues in various parts of the body have got different types of cell junctions, and these can actually be again further categorized, as you can see in the picture. It can be, or it can include tight junctions, desmosomes, and gap junctions. Now, if you look at these three, if you look at the first one, that is a tight junction, the cells are very, very closely packed. The first one. And so, invading microsomes, they actually attempt or try to break down these substances either chemically using enzymes such as protease, which can cause a structural damage, thereby creating a point of entry for the pathogens or the disease causing germs. Okay. So, tight junctions, desmosomes, and gap junctions, these are multiple types of cell junctions in the human tissue. Now, tight junctions, if you look at it carefully, they rivet two adjacent cells together, preventing external material, okay, or it limits the material exchange through the spaces between them because hardly there's any space available between them. Whereas coming to the second picture, that is desmosomes, they have intermediate fibers. Okay, and if you look at it carefully, they actually look more like shoelaces. So it is an interlinking of two cells together, so which actually allows small materials to pass through them because of the spaces that actually get created between these cells. The third one, as the name indicates, gap junctions. So naturally, there are gaps between these junctions, which actually provide channels between two cells that can actually allow or permit the communication between them. So the communication basically can be in the form of signals as well. Okay. So these three are those different types of cell junctions which actually are found in human tissues. Now, coming to the first barrier, the first important or the most important physical barrier, which also is the largest organ in the human body, that is the skin. So, as you can see, and the thin upper layer of the skin is called as epidermis, and the second thicker layer is called the dermis, which actually contains hair follicles, sweat glands, nerves, and the blood vessels. So, as been clearly shown in the picture, so here it can be located. These are the blood vessels here. Then we have the hair follicles from where the hair actually roots out. Then we have the oil glands, which actually is a form of supplying of nutrients to the hair as well. Then, of course, the uppermost layer, this is the epidermis. Then we have the hypoepidermis. And of course, we have that common layer dermis on both the ends over here. So, this is how the basic structure of the skin actually looks like. So, coming to the further explanation here, a layer of this fatty tissue, which is called as the hypodermis, lies exactly below the dermis. And this hypodermis, which is the layer present at the bottom of the thickness of the skin, contains the blood and lymph vessels. So basically, again, the human skin has got three layers: the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. And this actually provides a thick barrier between microbes outside the body and deeper tissues. Now, coming to the topmost layer of the skin, that is the epidermis, it consists of cells which are packed and called as keratin. And these dead cells remain as a tightly connected, dense layer of protein filled cell husks on the surface of the skin. So mechanically, the keratin actually makes the skin surface quite tough and resistant to degradation of bacterial enzymes. At the same time, keratin also helps to make the outer surface of the skin relatively waterproof, thereby not allowing the outside, I mean, even when the skin gets wet, doesn't allow the water to actually get into the deeper layers of the skin. And that actually keeps the keratin, the substance keratin, keeps the surface of the skin dry as well as reduces the microbial growth. Apart from this, there is the oil glands. The sebum from the oil glands in the hair follicles is also another endogenous mediator, and at the same time provides an additional layer of defense by helping to seal off the pore of the hair follicles. So, sealing of the pore of the hair follicles prevents the bacteria on the skin surface from invasion of sweat glands and surrounding tissues. So, the sweat glands and surrounding tissues are protected by the sebum, which is actually secreted from the hair follicle. Then there are even certain can be called as members of the microbiome, which can actually use lipase enzymes to degrade sebum, using it as a food source as well. And this in turn produces oleic acid, which creates a mildly acidic environment on the surface of the skin that is actually inhospitable to many pathogenic microbes. So, what can we say here? So, oleic acid is an example of an exogenously produced mediator because it is produced by those resident microbes and not directly by the blood cells. And the third one is perspiration, which actually provides to an extent some moisture to the epidermis, which can increase the potential for microbial growth as well. And due to this, more microbes are found in the regions of the skin that produces more sweat, especially in the regions of the underarms and the groin area. And in addition to water, sweat also contains substances which can also inhibit or stop microbial growth, such as salts, lysosomes, and antimicrobial peptides. Infections can also occur when the skin barrier is compromised or broken. Like, for example, a wound can serve as a point of entry for the pathogens which can infect the skin tissue surrounding the wound and possibly can spread even to deeper tissues. So, mostly during an infection like an injury, uh, not infection, during the instances of an injury, the injured area should be protected either by bandaging or using a band aid, which can actually prevent the entry of opportunistic pathogens, which can cause infection to the skin as well. The second barrier in the physical aspect can be the eye, but comparing again, the eye and the skin have distinct anatomy, and they both, the skin as well as the eye, are in direct contact with the external environment all the time. An important component of the eye is the lacrimal drainage system, which actually serves as a source for the fluid of the eye called tears. And tears, they flow from the external eye to the nasal cavity by the lacrimal apparatus, which is generally composed of structures which are involved in the production of tears. And there are two small openings, one on the inner edge of the inside edge of the upper eyelid, and one on the inside edge of the lower eyelid, which is near the nose. And each of these openings, called as lacrimal punctum, which collects tears from eye and are conveyed or passed through the lacrimal ducts to a reservoir for tears called as the lacrimal sac, which can also be called as the tear sac. And from the tear sac, the tears fluid or the tears flows via a nasolacrimal duct to the inner nose, and each of these ducts is located underneath the skin and passes through the bones of the face into the nose. And there are chemical substances present in the tears, such as the defensins or lactoferrin and lysosome, which actually helps in preventing the pathogens to get accumulated or prevents in colonization of or colonization by the pathogens. So this is the second barrier in the first line of defense. The third can be mucous membranes, which is a common lining which is found in the nose, mouth, lungs, urinary, and digestive tracts, which provides another non-specific barrier against potential pathogens. And mucous membranes consist of a layer of epithelial cells which are bound by tight junctions. And because of this, there's or most of the pathogens find it very difficult to get through this barrier of tight junctions of the epithelial cells. And the epithelial cells at the same time they secrete a moist, sticky substance called mucus, which actually covers and protects the most delicate or the fragile layers or the fragile cell layers beneath them and traps the debris. And this is because of the epithelial cells which are bound by tight junctions. So the type of debris, like mostly particulate matter, includes microbes, actually are blocked from entering into these areas, which can actually cause infections. And in many regions of the body, mechanical actions actually serve or help to flush mucus along with the dead microbes out of the body or away from the potential sites of infection. Like, for example, in the respiratory system, when a person breathes or inhales, okay, it can bring microbes, dust, or spores and other airborne debris into the body, which can cause infections. And to prevent these substances from entering into the body to cause infection, like for example, the nasal cavity is lined with a mucous membrane and Bowman's glands that produce or helps mucus to trap particles and microorganisms for removal by forming a thin sheet or a blanket. And the viscosity and acidity of these substances also prevents microbial attachment to the cells which are actually lying underneath. Apart from this, the epithelial cells lining the upper parts of the respiratory tract, which are called as ciliated epithelial cells. Now, the word when I use ciliated is because these epithelial cells have hair-like structures or appendages known as the cilia. And movement of these hair-like structures, the cilia, helps in removing or it propels the what can I say, debris-laden mucus out and away from the lungs. And once it is thrown out of these areas, the expelled mucus is then swallowed and destroyed in the stomach, or it can be coughed out, or it can be sneezed out as well. And the system of removal is often called as the mucociliary escalator. So this is how uh, this second line of defense, the first line of defense, which is also the mucous membrane, helps the human body from getting vulnerable to infections. So it can actually act as a protective layer. And sometimes disruption of the mucociliary escalator by damaging effects like people who generally smoke, okay, can lead to increased colonization of bacteria, that is accumulation of bacteria in the lower respiratory tract. And that actually can cause frequent infections because what here happens is the physical barrier is lost due to smoking, or it can also happen due to infections from disease like the cystic fibrosis. And therefore, the outer surface of the lungs is, to get to prevent from infections, it is protected with a double-layered pleural membrane, which actually protects the lungs and provides a kind of lubrication to permit the lungs to move easily during the respiration. But generally in a long run, people who are prone to heavy smoking, so this mucous membrane can get damaged extensively, allowing the inner layers of the lungs also to get infected. In the same way, apart from the respiratory tract, even the intestines are actually lined up with mucous membrane, or even for example the stomach, the inner layers of the stomach, they are as well lined with mucous membrane. And in fact, the layers of the stomach, okay, which generally secrete hydrochloric acid, which is a very strong acid. In spite of the secretions, because the stomach in the human body is lined up with the mucous membranes, does not allow the inner layers of the stomach to get infected by the hydrochloric acid secretion. And because, as I said, secretion of HCl, that is hydrochloric acid, the stomach actually is an extremely acidic environment. And as the gastric juices keep breaking down food, they even kill many ingested microbes, which helps in infection from pathogens. Apart from this, the intestinal tract is also lined up with epithelial cells, which are interspersed with mucus secreting goblet cells, and the mucus cells with material received from the stomach, trapping foodborne microbes and debris, also get mixed and help in preventing the inner layers of the intestines to get infected.